Growing up, life was anything but simple. Diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 7, I unknowingly became the center of a storm that fractured my family in ways I couldn't comprehend at the time. My condition marked the beginning of a series of challenges that my parents, emotionally and mentally unprepared, chose not to face. Instead, they retreated into a realm where I was no longer a cherished member of the family, but an unwanted burden. The first signs were subtle, like the stark difference in how they treated my older brother, who was 2 years my senior. He was everything they had hoped for: healthy, compliant, and easy to manage. I, however, with my unpredictable seizures, complicated their lives in a way they had neither anticipated nor accepted. At the age of 9, my life became even more complex. On top of epilepsy, I was diagnosed with severe reading difficulties and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. My parents, overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations, fell further into their pattern of detachment. Rather than rise to the occasion, they withdrew, treating me with cold indifference. Their choice was evident in every silent room I entered, and in the way conversations died when I approached. It was as if my very presence drained the life out of the space. This behavior, which started when I was around 8, deepened as I aged, casting long shadows over my formative years. As a teenager, the emotional neglect left a mark too deep to ignore. By the time I reached 14, my frustration manifested in acts of rebellion. Anger became my constant companion, fueling behavior that spiraled beyond my control. I deliberately failed classes, stopped caring about my studies, and acted out in ways that pushed away even the friends who tried to stand by me. My rudeness and defiance were not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I desperately wanted to be seen and heard by the very people who had chosen to forget me. My parents' response was as indifferent as ever. When my school called them in for meetings about my escalating misbehavior, they would sigh in exasperation and dismiss the situation without any real concern. Their only reaction was disappointment, which they wore like armor against involvement. My tantrums at home were ignored. I might as well have been invisible. It hurt even more when they talked about me as though I wasn't there, reducing my outbursts to mere fits and rolling their eyes at my attempts to reach out. Everything came to a head when I violated a major rule at school. One afternoon, fed up with everything, I brought a pack of cigarettes to class and lit one in the middle of a lesson. When my teacher demanded I stop, I defiantly flipped him off. That moment was a line crossed, and I knew there was no going back. My parents were summoned, and unlike before, they did not just sigh and nod. This time, they unleashed their anger, saying words that would sear into my memory forever. They claimed they regretted having me, that if they had known I would turn out this way, they would have terminated the pregnancy. They called me a burden, one they wished they could erase. It was as if a hidden wound had been ripped open, exposing the truth I had always known but had never heard spoken aloud. The punishment that followed was unlike any I'd ever experienced. They grounded me, locking me in my room for an entire week. My world became 4 walls, punctuated only by bathroom breaks and the meals they slid through the door without a word. The silence was suffocating. The realization that my parents, my own parents, were capable of such cruelty was shattering. I was not a criminal, not some wayward stranger, but their child. Yet, to them, I was just an unfortunate mistake they wished they could undo. At the end of that week, they showed me just how far they were willing to go. One day, they told me to pack all my belongings. My brother and mother quietly gathered my things while I stood there, numb and silent. I assumed they were sending me away for a short time, perhaps to my strict but kind grandmother's house to teach me a lesson. But the truth was far worse. Once we arrived, It became clear that this was not a temporary arrangement. They were abandoning me. My father spoke in a voice stripped of warmth, telling my grandmother that I was her responsibility now. They said they could no longer bear the weight of me in their lives and needed to focus on my normal brother. Their parting words stung worse than any physical blow could. They never wanted to see or hear from me again. I stood at the door, my hands shaking as they unloaded my belongings. Despite everything, I begged them to reconsider. Deep down, I still longed for their love, for the tiniest indication that I mattered. But they remained resolute, unmoved by my pleas. Their backs turned, they drove away, leaving me to grapple with the reality that I was now truly alone. My grandmother, who had been watching from the doorway, wrapped her arms around me as I collapsed into tears. She was in her 70s, and I knew taking me in was not an easy decision for her. She explained that she had hesitated when my parents first asked, doubting her ability to manage a troubled teenager. But after hearing how they had treated me, she knew she couldn't leave me with them any longer. In that moment, I made a silent vow to change. My grandmother didn't deserve the burden that my parents had refused to carry. I would become someone who could make her proud. The days that followed were difficult, but transformative. My grandmother, though set in her ways, offered the structure and support I desperately needed. She found tutors who specialized in learning disabilities and enrolled me in a school that understood my challenges. Unlike my parents, she viewed my conditions not as excuses, but as reasons to push harder. Her faith in me gave me the drive to succeed. Slowly, I began to improve, my grades lifted, and my sense of worth started to take root. By the time I graduated high school, I wasn't just another statistic. I was a survivor. College became my new chapter. With my grandmother cheering me on, I pursued higher education and thrived. My parents, however, were conspicuously absent from every milestone. Though they occasionally visited my grandmother, they never asked to see me. If I knew they were coming, I would leave the house until they were gone. It was a silent agreement we both seemed content with.